the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, September 14th, 2015, start of a brand new week, getting into the middle of September and getting into autumn. Getting reports from around the country about how temperatures are starting to drop and temperature records are being set, low temperature records here. Quick reminder before we get into the program here, I will be a guest on Coast to Coast tonight from 10 p.m. to midnight Pacific time and talking about all kinds of current events. So I hope you'll make a point of tuning in and listening to that particular broadcast. Now then, as you know, there was yet another shooting incident over at Delta State University, Mississippi. Turns out it wasn't a mass shooting. A history professor was shot in his office. The shooter has disappeared. Whether the shooter was angry over a book this guy had just published or what a bad grade he got, we don't know. But that's the last story. It's not a mass shooting, and as a result, the media is already kind of fading away from it. The big story from over the weekend is Jeremy Corbyn winning the leadership of the Labour Party by the widest mandate in British history, even larger than phony Tony Blair's. And it's been a tremendous upset for the British political establishment. And everybody's gnashing their teeth and wailing and tearing their hair and all the rest of it. But what's really interesting, there was an analysis done in offguardian.org that the reason people were rallying to Jeremy Corbyn is not just because he's anti-EU, anti-austerity, and pro-Palestine, but because the media basically were trying to destroy him, and everybody could see it. And because of social media, every time they misquoted him to try and criticize or smear him, social media would light up saying, no, that's not what he said. The BBC is again playing fast and loose. The Guardian's playing fast. All of the media. And the more the media pounded on him with lies and deception, the stronger his support was. He walked to that victory. And another big part of it, of course, is the Jewish lobby in Britain was opposed to him. They absolutely did not want him in there because he is sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. And everyone is proclaiming that the Labour Party has ditched the Israel lobby. It is a major defeat because the lobbies in all these countries survive on an image of infallibility, invincibility. You don't dare go up against the Israel lobby. Corbyn did, and he won. And now Britain has a party leader who is not in the pocket of the Israel lobby, and frankly, we need more of that sort of thing around here. So the British lobby, Israel lobby, is just up in arms about this. Oh, it's, we have this specter of a British government that is not sympathetic, not going to work with Israel. And I would like to remind everybody in Great Britain, and for that matter, Canada and the United States, the job of the politicians of a country are not to work with Israel. The job of the leaders of a country is to do what is best for the people of that country, whether it's Britain, Canada, or the United States. And my message to all of these politicians who love Israel, I'm a friend to Israel, I want to work for Israel, move there. And vacate your office for somebody who's going to put our country and our countrymen as their top priority. We've really kind of been fed up with that. So the establishment in Britain is fall down, go boom. Everybody's upset. Apparently 8 of the front benchers resigned in horror that Corbyn actually won. And it looks like at least the British political establishment about to fall down, go boom. And Corbyn's victory, coupled with Trump's ascendancy here in the United States, is a signal that people around the world are fed up with the Friends of Israel. They're fed up with war. They're fed up with lies. They're fed up with austerity to make the money junkies richer than they already are. And we should be able to see some major changes about to happen. Now, people are already asking if Jeremy Corbyn can stem the tide of neoliberalism and militarism. because he's not in favor of any more of these wars that Britain has been dragged into at the behest of the United States of America. Now, the first result that has happened since Corbyn's victory is thousands of British people are signing up to join the Labour Party. They were sort of feeling Labour had kind of turned their backs on them, along with the Tories. Corbyn's victory, all of a sudden there's a huge new flood of support. 15,000 people at least have said, I will be a part of the Labour Party. Now, needless to say, the establishment is trying to downplay the whole situation. Story out of The Guardian, Jeremy Corbyn's landslide election met with skepticism from the international press. And it's saying there's going to be a hostile reception for Corbyn in parts of Europe and the Middle East. As the German newspaper Die Welt describes him as leftist utopian, not fit for the real world, meaning he's not fit for the established economic fascist order. He's not fit for the money junkies, not fit for the Israel firsters, which is exactly why he got all of that support. The Tories are in a panic, trying to smear him and say, we're not going to work with him, we're going to bring him down. The Defense Secretary of Britain is saying Corbyn is a risk to the security of Britain. Of course, these days, security means attacking and bombing other countries we're not actually at war with. And maybe the British people have had enough of that. I know the American people have. And finally, a story coming out of IrishCentral.com. Think Trump can't be elected? Look what just happened in Britain, because everything they were saying about Corbyn, unelectable, a joke, not serious, they're saying exactly the same thing about Trump. And the people all around the world are fed up with the establishment status quo politicians, the friends of Israel, and they're doing something about it and reinforcing that idea. Down in Australia, Tony Abbott has been forced out of his office. There was a leadership ballot, and Malcolm Turnbull is the new PM down there. He's seen as much more moderate than Abbott was. Now, here's a very scary story. This is over at dailycallerNewsFoundation.org. According to a poll conducted by YouGov, 29% of Americans could imagine supporting a military overthrow of the U.S. federal government. I'm not on that list. I don't think a military overthrow is going to improve things here based on historical track records of military overthrows. But it does indicate that a significant part of the American people have had it with Washington, D.C. Another story coming out of Business Insider. Civil unrest is already happening in America, and it could get a lot worse in 2016. And yes, that is certainly true. People are very unhappy with things the way they are in this country. Now, getting over to Syria, that is really heating up. Russia is constructing a new runway for transport aircraft. They've sent in military advisors. No ground troops yet. Syria's government has come out and said anybody claiming that there are Russian soldiers on the ground in Syria, it's a flat-out lie. Russia is sending to Syria the same support they always have: weapons, supplies, logistics. Now, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has accused the United States of protecting ISIS. He says, we know, the U.S. knows where the ISIS bases are, and they refuse to bomb. They keep bombing Syrian assets and claiming it's a mistake. This whole dodge of using ISIS as an excuse to attack Assad, everybody knows that's what's going on. It's all a giant fraud. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and story coming out of LibertyBlitzkrieg.com. Further details emerge on the epic U.S. foreign policy disaster that is Syria. And at this point, it's kind of hard to pick which is the worst foreign policy disaster. Syria, Ukraine, Iraq is definitely in the running. Yemen is in the running. Libya is in the running. It's disaster after disaster after disaster. But in particular with Syria, they're looking at the recent failure of this very expensive program the U.S. undertook to train moderate Syrian forces to fight the Islamic State and also, of course, take on Bashar al-Assad, who is still the primary objective, getting rid of Assad. ISIS and al-Qaeda were dropped into Syria to give the U.S. government an excuse to go in and carry out airstrikes, and they keep bombing critical Syrian infrastructure saying, oh, well, ISIS was going to use that. But as Lavrov and so many other people have pointed out, the U.S. knows where the ISIS bases are. They never bomb them. They have video of U.S. aircraft dropping supplies to ISIS to keep them going. It's all a gigantic hoax to allow the U.S. to basically wage war against a nation that has done nothing whatsoever to our country to deserve it, other than to refuse to do as they're told. Now, there's another story over in Blacklisted News. Who's to blame for the Syria mess? Oh, it's Putin. That's it. You know, whatever is going wrong, it's all Putin's fault. Putin's responsible for Syria. Putin is responsible for global warming. Putin is responsible for whatever. It's just non-stop demonization of Putin and Russia. And we all know what's really going on here. The U.S. has embarked on a global campaign of regime change to build a new American empire resting on puppet rulers of these covertly conquered nations. And it's starting to come apart because these conquered nations are refusing to stay conquered. They're kicking out their U.S. puppet rulers, and everybody knows that's what the U.S. is up to. Now, David Cameron has changed his story regarding why Britain bombed Syria, and originally came out and said that bombing of ISIS in Syria was justified because it was defending Britain's national security. Well, the United Nations was saying that really doesn't pass muster. So now David Cameron has changed his story and said, okay, all right, let's try this one. We're bombing ISIS in Syria to protect Iraq. It's like Maxwell Smart. Would you believe we're bombing them to protect Iraq? Now, there's a very troubling development. As you know, the U.S. does not want Russia in Syria, which is kind of weird because you need to understand something fundamental. Syria has asked for Russia's help against ISIS and al-Qaeda. Syria's government has not asked the United States to come in to bomb, theoretically, ISIS, in actuality, Syrian assets. So you know who the bad guy is here? The one who's just pushing into a country where they are not wanted. Now, because of this little kerfuffle going on between the U.S. and Russia, there is no communication between the U.S. and Russian forces in Syria. They're not talking to each other. In theory, according to the propaganda, they're both aligned against the common enemy of ISIS and al-Qaeda. But these two militaries are not coordinating their actions and airstrikes, and that is a perfect situation for there to be some kind of an accident, which will then be blamed on Putin. And finally, over the weekend, it came out. You know that tragic photo of the drowned Syrian child was on the beach, actually washed up on the rocks. They moved it to get a better picture. It turned out the child was not a refugee. It turned out the child was actually the son of the man who owned the boat who was making money as a people smuggler. And he liked to take his family along on these little trips across the Mediterranean. So it's not even really a refugee, and yet it's been used all over to say, oh, the poor refugee crisis, open your doors and let them in. All right, we're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Mark in Texas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. Mike, hey, I'm looking forward to listening to you on Coast to Coast tonight.
Thank you.
All right? Find out a little more about who you are, because, I mean, you're one of the best in talk in the talk thing today. But anyway, what I wanted to say is, don't these clowns in the mainstream media and in our government understand that most of us don't get our news from them anymore, that we get them on the internet? I also get it from RT. I don't know if you can get RT at your TV. Just had this morning, I was watching on RT's headline news. They said that they were interviewing a Syrian officer who was helping the Kurds, because the Turks, our wonderful NATO allies, the Turks, were attacking the Kurds. So the Syrian army is now helping the Kurds. They are starting to turn things around, thank God. And you know what? They're not fooling anybody. Putin, I think, is a hero. Russia is becoming the United States, and we're becoming the Soviet Union. That's sad for us. I mean, I can only say good things about Russia these days. I mean, they were really doing what they're standing up to the New World Order, or whatever you want to call them, Illuminati, or whatever you want to call them, just a corporate elite. Russia is standing up, and so, by the way, is Assad of Syria. They're not kidding anybody. This is a good guy. And I started wondering, too, about Iran, whether they're really the bad guys that they make them out to be or not.
No, they're not. They're not.
I'm not sure.
Neither was Gaddafi. I mean, it's the same pattern.
Well, that I know.
Yeah.
That I know about Gaddafi. Gaddafi was actually did a lot of good things for his people, and a lot of the problems we're seeing other refugees coming in from Libya are also coming in from Central Africa because Gaddafi was actually helping the countries around him as well as Libya. And I just don't, and by the way, when we talk about Mrs. Slick Willie there, this woman is evil to the core. She was behind, her and her henchwomen there in the State Department were behind the slaughter of the Libyan people, the bombing of the Libyan people. She giggled like a little girl when Gaddafi was dead. And as far as Obama goes, he's just, they pushed Obama, who was also, I think we should have war crime trials starting with George W. Bush and his neocon allies, going right into Obama. And actually, we could also try Slick Willie Clinton and his bunch.
I would actually go back one more. I'd go back one more generation to George Herbert Walker Bush.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would definitely go back to him as well. Anyway, listen, got to let you go. We're coming up on our first commercial break. I know we got another caller waiting on the line, but I'm going to leave you until after we come back from the commercial break because we don't have enough time to take your phone call. Meanwhile, the U.S. is going to send 75 more troops to Egypt's Sinai in response to the threat of ISIS. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right to the telephones here, talk to Steve in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, those 4 explosions in China, what do you make of that? Do you think that might be a U.S. false flag?
Not a false flag. If they were not genuine accidents, and we don't know that for a fact that they were not, we do know that in times of economic war, sabotage of critical economic assets generally will come into it. And we know that the U.S. government has in times past sabotaged crops and industrial facilities in countries that owed the U.S. money in order to keep them trapped on that debt. And so, given that these explosions happened at a time when the U.S. was attempting to undermine China's economy, to destroy trust in the yuan, to keep the world coming for the U.S. dollar, we can't rule out acts of sabotage for economic gain.
Right. Another thing, I'm watching Al Jazeera today, and talked about the Afghan prison break. I don't know if you talked about that yet.
And that was next on the list.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of seems so scripted, to allow this stuff to happen in order to keep their invasion going and their mission going of staying in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, I just kind of see it that way. It's allow them back out again and then chase them again. It kind of seems that way to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you because, the Taliban, had been rounded up. They were in prison. Everybody's saying, look, there's no reason for the U.S. to be staying in Afghanistan any longer. Of course, the real reason we're remaining in Afghanistan is the oil and the opium. So, yeah, when you've got them all corralled up, oh, golly gee whiz, they all broke free, and we have to start all over again, catching them. So, of course, we have to stay in Afghanistan.
Yeah. One last question. Also on Al Jazeera News, they mentioned that in the Iranian parliament that there is one Jewish citizen that is part of the Iranian parliament. I was blown away hearing that and thought to myself, well, how can that person be fair and impartial and non-biased? I mean, that seems like almost like an insider trading kind of deal to allow somebody in from Israel to be part of the Iranian parliament.
No. Wait a minute. They're not from Israel. Iran has a very large Jewish population, and they've been there for quite a long time. I think one of the largest, oldest synagogues in that part of the world is inside Iran, and Israel tried to lure the Iranian Jews to emigrate to Israel, and basically they told Israel, no, we're happy here, our lives are here, our friends are here, our businesses here, and they're treated very well by the Iranian government, which of course underscores the fact that all the claims about how Iran wants to have a new Holocaust and kill all the Jews, look how well they're treated inside Iran, where obviously Iran gets to call all the shots. And it's been a major political embarrassment for Israel that the Iranian Jews did not want to emigrate. But yeah, the Jewish population in Iran is doing very well. They're in business, they're in media, they're in the parliament. At one point, I think there were 3 Jewish representatives in the parliament, and I'm surprised it's down to just 1. Yeah, there's no discrimination against Jews in Iran.
So you think their loyalty is not to be challenged at all? You think they're loyal to Iran, correct?
I really don't know. Certainly from the point of view of Netanyahu, he's come out and said that Jews living anywhere in the world have to be more loyal to Israel than to the countries in which they live, and certainly there are a percentage of Jews who go along with that, but here in the United States, it's less and less. The American Jewish community is starting to really pull back away from Israel's extremism.
Hey, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now then, over in Yemen, the United Nations said, let's try and calm this whole situation down. And they wanted to set up talks between Yemen's ousted puppet ruler, who they describe as the internationally recognized president, ignoring the fact he's not recognized by his own people as being the president. But they were going to set up the talks, and Yemen's former puppet ruler has backed out. We're not going to talk. It's an all-or-nothing deal. And what's really interesting is this arrogant presumption that the internationally recognized leader of a nation somehow overrules the will of the people of that nation. That's what they're trying to sell you. Doesn't matter what the people of Yemen want. We recognize this as the ruler of Yemen. Imperial arrogance, as it were. Meanwhile, the Yemen army has captured a Saudi military base in Jizan, and I ran this story to make a point. Notice how it is the Yemen army that is involved in trying to deal with Saudi Arabia's incursion. And it just puts the lie to the claim that this is all about putting down the Houthi rebels. No, it isn't. It's about punishing the people of Yemen until they accept their U.S. puppet ruler back. And I don't think that's going to happen. Now, screaming about Russian aggression, Russian aggression, Russian aggression, the U.S. military is going to reopen their military base in Iceland at Reykjavik. Keflavik. And the U.S. used to have, I think, 4 facilities on Iceland, 5 if you count old Reykjavik. But they're going to garrison Iceland to basically project power over the North Atlantic sea lanes of communication. Because the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. And indeed, I'm not the only person who's pointing that out. Over at journalneo.org, they're saying the Western media is just nonstop. It's Russian aggression in Syria. No, it isn't. The legitimate government of Syria asked for Russia's help against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That's not aggression. Syria has not invited the United States to come in and bomb craters all over the place, and by the way, triggering the refugee crisis. The days when the big lie would work are gone. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, when Adolf Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, he included a warning about a propaganda trick called the big lie, which was a lie that was so enormous and over the top that people would just instinctively believe it. And he warned his readers in Mein Kampf, be on the lookout for that big lie technique because it is used all the time. But, as was pointed out with the article about how social media undermined the corporate media attack on Jeremy Corbyn, these tactics don't work any longer. In fact, one of the best hopes we have that we're going to come out of this crisis with our lives and our property and our freedoms still intact is that everybody in charge of the foreign policy, propaganda of the U.S. government, they're a bunch of Cold War fossils from the 1950s and 1960s. And they're playing the game by the rules that worked back then, and they just don't understand. They don't work anymore. Maybe because they're surrounded by all these parasitic sycophants who are protecting their very well-paid, plush government jobs by telling the boss not what the boss needs to know, but what they think the boss wants to hear. Oh, yeah, we're doing fine. They believe you. Absolutely. They're afraid of the terrorists. They will do whatever you want. Yes, sir. Can I have a raise? And remember, in the closing days of World War II, the German High Command was doing exactly the same thing to Hitler. Oh, yeah, we've got another 4 divisions parked over here. You can use them anytime you want. Now, over in Barcelona, 1.4 million Catalans marched through the center of town to show support for the region's independence movement just 2 weeks before a make-or-break election on this topic. There is no going back. Catalan wants to be free. Spain wants to keep them slaves. And by the way, we're getting word Scotland is going to retry the independence referendum up there. I'm sure they'll be a little more careful about who's actually counting the votes this time. Going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And obviously, all of these U.S. wars on all of these countries around the globe have triggered a huge refugee crisis, or created the ground where somebody could manufacture a refugee crisis, and we're still not sure exactly what's going on. But it's clearly spiraling out of control. Now, over in Europe, there is a huge resentment that they are being asked to take the flotsam and jetsam from U.S. military adventures. There are anti-refugee demos all over Europe. Demonstration in Warsaw, Poland, 5,000 people. Even larger demonstrations up in Germany. Meanwhile, the corporate media focuses on the welcome refugee demonstrations that usually feature about 12 to 15 very bored-looking people holding suspiciously identical signs. Now, in Germany, there's a Facebook firestorm against Angela Merkel for saying, yeah, we can bring in all the refugees. Saying, you will bring Germany to the edge of a civil war. And Germany is now starting to dig their heels in and say, we can't do any more. Germany and Czechoslovakia have reinstituted border controls with Austria. They've had to deploy riot police to deal with this huge influx. There's an interesting article over in the Mises organization. Forget the Greek economic crisis. Immigration is going to bring about the end of the European Union. So, anyway, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, do any of the refugees have any cookies with them? Because isn't this part of Victoria Nuland's FU to the EU?
I'm sorry, do the refugees have what with them?
Any of those cookies Victoria Nuland makes.
Oh,
because if you think about it, isn't this the FU to the EU scenario?
Actually, what I think, if this was kicked up artificially, I think the goal was to create this crisis of Syrian refugees, because notice they talk about it solely in terms of the Syrian refugees. They're not talking about the Libyans or any of the people coming out of the other countries being attacked by the United States. It's always Syrian, Syrian, Syrian. And I think the idea was to get everybody to say, we don't want the Syrian refugees, and then the U.S. will say, well, the only reasonable answer is we have to cut Syria in half, so the Syrians can go back to a safe haven in their own country, and they'll have the half that has all the oil resources, and we'll let Assad remain the leader of this little tiny chip over by the coast, where he can go on being Assad, and we can otherwise ignore him. That may be a reason they kicked this refugee crisis off. However, it looks to me like it has already spiraled completely out of control.
Hey, Mike, I want to talk about Russia and Syria. People think like we have a big Navy. You know, that's what we have more than pretty much any other country. Everything else is about equal, you know, but our big Navy can be, you know, dunked if people look up the Squall super cavitating torpedo that does 200 knots. I mean, people don't realize, we keep saying Russian aggressive. If we keep this up and start a war with the Russians, you will never see an aggression like you would any other way.
Well, the U.S. has got somewhere around at least 800 foreign military bases around the world. Every other nation's foreign military bases put together comes to only 30. So, yeah, it's very obvious who the aggressor, who the imperial power is trying to be. And you're absolutely right. America's weapons are very expensive. They're not very good. We've been hearing horror stories about the new Gerald R. Ford carrier, all of its new high-tech whiz-bang. They can't get it to work. Independence-class littoral combat ships are corroding as soon as they're dunked in the ocean. F-22, F-35, and on and on and on. And I mentioned earlier that when we were heading into World War II, the conventional wisdom in the Navy was the battleship reigned supreme on the ocean, and this thing called an aircraft carrier was, well, it was kind of interesting and it had its uses, but the mainstay was going to be the battleship. And then, of course, World War II showed how foolish that idea was. Well, now the conventional naval doctrine is the carriers rule the sea, and yet because of that tight concentration of force projection, there are also targets. And you've got Russia's supercavitating torpedo, and you've got the new Chinese anti-ship missile that has a range of something like close to 1,000 miles, and it travels at Mach 10, and its radar is specifically designed to hunt down a carrier in the middle of a battle group and kill it. And there was a little bit of a kerfuffle a couple of months ago where I think it was the Joint Chiefs called in the head of the Navy and said, if we go to war with Russia and China, what is the life expectancy of our carrier groups? And the guy from the Navy said, maybe 2 weeks, 3 if you keep them in port, which was not the answer they wanted to hear. The fact of the matter is that we're building more of these hugely expensive aircraft carriers, and other countries are developing relatively inexpensive weapons specifically designed to take them out.
Well, the DF-21 is the Chinese built is a ballistic missile and a cruise missile, and for the price of one carrier, they can build 1,200 of them.
Yes.
Now imagine 1,200. There's no way in the universe you can stop 1,200.
Yeah, that's basic. You don't even need 1,200 to go against a carrier. If you send in maybe 15, the Sea-Whiz is not going to be able to deal with that, especially because the Sea-Whiz is not designed to intercept targets coming in at Mach 10. The Sea-Whiz is already obsolete and outdated. It can barely handle a target traveling at the speed of sound.
I'm just so upset. Like, you see all these refugees, right? It's like, what are they supposed to do now? We have uprooted their whole lives, man. I mean, it's like insane. We're insane. Like, or our government, at least. And some of the population, it's just they don't care. It's like you just see these refugees. Where are they supposed to go? What are they supposed to do?
Well, see, the authors of World War don't care about that. They never have. All they see is, victory and wealth and power and our place in the history books and all these people being killed in combat or displaced. Well, that's just the background. That's what makes it an epic event. It makes us look better in the history books to see all these people displaced from their homes. I mean, really, there's zero empathy for the refugees, for the American military people who are being killed and crippled, for the American people in general who are being asked to pay for all this stuff that we know is a morally indefensible war, and plus war crimes to go with it.
You just look, though, I mean, you figure if this was done to us, we would have such hatred and animosity toward who did this, and, this is the whole root, of like Washington, what they have done, and EU and NATO and the rest of these criminals, Brussels, man, don't get me started on Brussels.
Well, that's the attitude. I mean, when they're talking about the internationally recognized president of Yemen, it's this attitude that the U.S. and its allies have a right to go into a country and saying, no, you don't want that government you elected. We're going to take that one out, and you will accept this government who is going to run your country for the best interests of American corporations. And of course, every time that has happened, the standard of living, the quality of life in that country goes down because you don't get riches looted from a nation without plundering the people who live there.
Yeah, I wonder what the Saudis in their M1A1 Abrams thought about the 1970s.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And by the way, the Soviets have put out a new main battle tank that makes the Abrams look like this clunky piece of junk.
The Armada.
It's amazing. The Armada, yeah, that's an amazing, and and I'm opposed to war, but every once in a while you look at something and say, boy, what a cool toy they've come up with here. And especially that new fighter they debuted at the Paris Air Show. There was just...
the T-50.
Yeah, it's just...
oh, wow.
That thing just dances in the sky.
Their hardware, they don't have to spend a lot of money. I mean, you can, they still got the Su-35 and the MiG-29. All they do is upgrade the components in there. Save a lot of money doing it like that.
Their goal is to build an effective weapon, not to make the defense contractors rich. That's why they get more bang for their buck. Got to take a break for our top of the hour news. We'll be back with more after the break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We've got a caller we're going to go to here in just a minute, but I need to correct myself because last hour I mentioned that Germany and the Czech Republic have closed their borders with Austria, and I used the older name of Czechoslovakia, which tells you how old I am. And I wasn't up to date on all these name changes, but it's the Czech Republic that has closed its border with Austria, and one of our alert listeners corrected me on that. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Keith in Montana. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I was going to ask.
I'm sorry, it's Missouri. Keith in Missouri.
No, it's Montana.
It is Montana. Okay, okay, so both the control room guy and I misread the state abbreviation. I'm going to ask Tom to maybe actually spell out the state.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Anyway, hey, do you know what the education level in the United States is?
Oh, it's horrible. I mean, last week we had that Pew Scientific knowledge test, 12 questions, and it's what I would consider, coming from when I grew up, as grade school science, and apparently only 6% of Americans answered all 12 questions correctly. 20% of college graduates were unable to tell the difference between astrology and astronomy.
Yeah. Wait. There was a Twitter photo out there with one of the aircraft destroyers out there with the expletive Iraq written on its deck,
Yes, I've seen that.
Right, and so I looked that up just out of the blue there, and a modern flat top carrier costs a little over $12 billion and some change. And that's just a carrier. That doesn't account for the 20 some odd jets on top of the AWACS planes, all that stuff. Anyway, someone had asked me that on Twitter there, and so I put that out there, and then I says, building modern schools, getting back to education there, it would have been over 100 and some odd schools at 100 and some odd, I think it was 122 schools at $105 million a piece for the schools.
Yeah, well, do you remember Eisenhower's Cross of Iron speech?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and he, for the guy who basically led the Allies in Europe during World War II, war hero, had been there, done that, and he turned out to be one of the most anti-war presidents we've ever had. Warned us about the military-industrial complex. He basically had seen where it could go and how close it could get, and he in his career as president, he was always pushing for peace and negotiation and diplomacy. And now we have a government made up of people, the vast majority of whom have never actually served in military service, and they think war is fun, it's cool, it looks just like we see on the movies, as long as it's somebody else's kids who are going out there to be killed and crippled. Yeah,
I call that John Wayneism.
Yes.
But, anyway, so, just in the monies alone like that versus education. And then, of course, there's propaganda that we totally get. Like, I noticed during a GCN commercial there, they're hyping this Russian threat again like that,
Mm.
But it's amazing that so many people are so undereducated, and yet they think they know everything.
Well, that's been shaped by our educational system. We'll tell you what to think, and then you can feel good that you know what you're supposed to be telling everybody else. And the ability to critically examine what you're told has been de-emphasized. That's why so many Americans fail that basic science test. They don't want Americans to have an understanding of science which would lead them to question what they're being told. Good example, of course, human-caused global warming. Because, they put out that excuse, oh yes, the world really is warming, but the reason we're getting all these cold winters is the heat is hiding in the bottom of the ocean. And they put that out there in the sure and certain knowledge that an American public that doesn't understand things like convection is just going to say, oh yeah, the heat is hiding in the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah. So, all right, well, I just wanted to say, and of course I sent you an email there about my thoughts on this immigration thing. The way I see it, it's those countries that are vassal states that are broken with the United States, that the United States is just going to flood them with immigrants now.
Well, yeah, they're definitely playing politics with the immigrants. Here in the United States of America, the immigrants are being primarily shuttled into conservative GOP strongholds on this theory that all of these refugees will be so grateful to President Obama that they will become instant Democratic voters, just like all the illegal migrants coming up from Mexico and Central America.
It's a circus.
Yeah, and unfortunately the clowns are in charge.
Yep. All right, sounds good, Mike. You take care. Best of Claire.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to switch over to Andrew in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I wanted to say about, how the private central bankers and the money junkies, they basically just want to put the world, under one world government and one world central bank, because you've seen, countries like Yemen and Syria, they're refusing to go along with the U.S. and private central bank rule.
Well, basically, the one world government, one world bank model is designed to remove any possibility of choice from the human race in terms of maybe having a slightly different form of government, one, a republic with democratically chosen leaders, and certainly to remove the choice to have any other kind of national or global economy. They're out to erase this idea of a government creating and issuing a debt-free currency, because they know it does work for the nation, the globe, and its people, but it doesn't work for them. And that's what this is really all about, enslaving the world to private central banking for the rest of, however long before Earth gets swallowed by the sun. Because they feel honestly that we only exist to make them wealthy. And it's worked wonderfully. In just 300 years of the private central banking scam, the Rothschilds have become the richest family on the planet. Nobody even knows how much of it they already own.
I wanted to say, all these, New World Order guys, they basically just want to, eliminate Russia and China, and they feel all the world they could easily enslave the rest of the world, because those are, the two strongest countries that at least have, a chance of, stopping this, New World Order agenda.
Well, yeah, very much so, because the world is looking at the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan and renminbi as being preferable to the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking. The U.S. dollar is in serious, serious trouble. It is, in theory, backed up by the future slave labor of the American people, except they printed so many treasury bonds and so many dollars. There are never going to be enough living Americans paying taxes to ever make good on all those T-bills. And maybe they're thinking if they can flood the country with Mexicans and Costa Ricans and Nicaraguans and Libyans and Syrians, that there'll be a huge workforce that's going to be able to help redeem those treasury bonds, except that there are no jobs for those people. This 5.1% unemployment number is a total joke. And even the corporate media is now acknowledging that 5.1% unemployment number does not include the 94 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find a job.
And they also been lying about the debt, I think we're in 200 trillion, over that number.
Yes.
Not 20 trillion as they make it.
They're lying about everything, trying to hold it all together, and that's something the American people need to come to grips with. Everything coming out of the government and the corporate media is a lie to trick us out of our obedience, trick us out of our money, trick us out of the lives of our children in these wars of conquest.
All right, thanks, Michael. I'll be hearing you on Coast to Coast.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. We're coming up on another commercial break. And when we come on back, Doctors are already warning of disease outbreaks being possible in some of these refugee camps, in particular in Hungary. They don't have adequate facilities to take care of the health. We could see pandemics break out of this refugee crisis now. It's gone totally out of control. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, British Prime Minister David Cameron paid an unannounced visit down to Lebanon to inspect the refugee camps there and pledged $92 million to Lebanon's government for the care of the Syrian refugees. He's not being charitable. He doesn't want them showing up in Great Britain. So this situation is definitely spiraling out of control. Now, more and more people are picking up on the fact that Israel is at the forefront of screaming how Europe has to take in the Syrian and Libyan and everybody have refugees, and the U.S. has to take them, and all. But at the same time, of course, Israel's refusing any refugees at all. I mean, Israel has a much stronger economy, in part thanks to the American taxpayer, than these other nations, but will not take in a refugee because, you see, Israel has to maintain its Jewish purity. We can't have all those other people in here, but the rest of the world, you're all mongrels anyway, so you take in all the refugees. That's what you should. It appears to be the attitude of Israel. Refugees are great everywhere else except Israel, even though Israel's actions in Syria have contributed to this refugee crisis. Now, apparently, down in Israel, there is a rabbi who's gone on record as saying that this migrant influx into Europe is excellent news because it will bring about the death of Christianity and the Messiah will come. They're all listening to voices in their head and confusing it with the imaginary playmate in the sky, I would say. Now, the U.S. is getting ready to launch sanctions against China, ostensibly for cyber attacks, which the U.S. government absolutely insists they have proof came from China. All they can possibly have is an IP address. And they don't know if that IP address goes to a machine that was compromised by somebody in some other part of the world, because hackers will do that. They'll set up networks of machines all over the world, and they'll work through them to conceal their true origin. But the United States is absolutely convinced China's bad, and so they're going to start hitting China with sanctions, economic warfare. And as a result, President Xi Jinping's visit scheduled to the United States later this month, they may just call it off in protest. And I'll tell you what U.S. sanctions against China are going to do. They're going to backfire, just like the ones against Iran, just like the ones against Russia. It will accelerate China's move away from the U.S. dollar because the sanctions only affect dollar-centric transactions. And the push will be on to promote the yuan. Now, the United States and Israel are quietly holding talks on the post-Iran deal payoff. Pretty much everybody is coming to conclude that the P5+1 deal will stand. It's not going to get, the attempt to block it is not going to get through the Congress, not going to get through the Senate. The House is bought and paid for, but not the Senate. And so now the U.S. and Israel are in negotiations for all the additional weapons and money that you, the American taxpayer, will be forced to give to Israel. Because Israel's attitude is, you fail to give us what we want, and now you will atone with money and weapons. Remember when John McCain said he was delighted Israel has nuclear weapons? I mean, they're finally admitting what we've known all along. Israel's a nuclear-armed state. They're not weak victims at the mercy of their Arab neighbors. They're the nuclear power in the region. And McCain thinks that's good to counter Iran's aggression, which is no more real than Russia's aggression. Now, apparently, Netanyahu is due for another visit here in the United States, and the word is that he is not going to pull any punches in trying to humiliate and embarrass Barack Obama on the media and before the Congress as payback for refusing what Netanyahu wanted. See, Israel has had this image, if you will, of total control over the U.S. government. Even all the way back with Ariel Sharon. We, the Jewish people, control America, and the Americans know it. Well, we didn't as much back then. We do now. We've seen all these Israel firsters on full display in the House of Representatives. We've got to do what Israel tells us to do. To heck with the will of the people. They don't count. Israel counts because they write very generous campaign donations. Senator Lindsey Graham has decided that the time has come to blame Iran for 9/11. Oh, yes, Iran did 9/11. We've got to bomb them. Absolutely. Mike Hayden and Dennis Ross want Israel to have the massive ordnance penetrator. This is the ultimate bunker buster. It weighs 30,000 pounds. No current Israeli aircraft can deliver it. So along with giving Israel the massive ordnance penetrator bombs, the U.S. is going to have to give them the bombers able to carry it. The B-1A, the B-2, or the B-52. I'm sure Israel's going to say, we don't want that B-52. We want the B-2. We want the cool things. And apparently Mike Hayden, when he's being interviewed by Joe Scarborough, was saying only by giving Israelis a completely independent capability to attack Iranian targets can the U.S. make Iran fearful enough to make Israel feel good about itself. Well, there's a problem with that. When the nation has gone into paranoid delusion, there's no amount of weapons you're going to give them where they'll feel safe. And that's what we're dealing with. I mean, Israel is nuclear armed, Iran is not, and yet Israel is screaming, we are afraid of Iran. That's paranoid, delusional fantasy. And no amount of weapons is going to be able to fix that, because they're not dealing with reality. Now, the Israeli defense minister says the government of Israel knows who firebombed that house in the West Bank town of Duma, killing 3 people, 18-month-old baby, and 2 others, but nobody's being charged with the crime because apparently to identify and charge these individuals would expose government intelligence sources, which only makes sense if the firebombing of the house was an Israeli intelligence operation. Now, up in Moldova, massive protests there, already into a week, 20,000, demanding a government probe into missing money from 3 Moldovan banks. $1.5 billion just disappeared from the banks. And the people are very angry because they can't get their money out now. And they want some action on that situation. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy. Deutsche Bank has announced they're going to cut their workforce by a quarter, 25%. That's 23,000 jobs for Deutsche Bank. That's not a good indicator. Now, as you know, up in Kiev, there's been this ongoing argument over the fact that Ukraine is dependent on natural gas supplied by Russia. And Russia has not been getting paid for the natural gas. They've been very, very patient. They haven't shut it off yet. Now, Europe ponied up $500 million to give to Kiev to buy Russian gas. Gazprom is saying it's not enough. It's not enough to pay for the gas to get them through the winter. And it doesn't even begin to address the billions that Kiev owes to Gazprom. Now, Poroshenko's taken the attitude of Russia should just give Ukraine natural gas at the discounted price enjoyed by the previous government, and Russia says no. That deal, that discount on the gas, was because Ukraine was allowing Russia to use Crimea. Well, Crimea isn't part of Ukraine anymore. They voted themselves to be part of Russia, and there's no reason for Russia to discount their gas. And we are going into a very hard winter, despite what all the global warming fanatics, the Gore files, the carbon Nazis are saying. It's going to be a brutal winter for those people all over the Northern Hemisphere, and certainly true in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Sweden is having to borrow money to deal with the cost of all the refugees flooding into their country. This is not just a humanitarian disaster, and it is. This is the largest refugee crisis since World War II. It's going to be an economic crisis for all the nations that are being told they have to take these refugees in. Now, the European Union is already out there saying all the member nations of the EU have to take in the refugees or face sanctions. They're even talking about economic sanctions against countries that are not part of the EU for refusing refugees. Now, here in the United States, 5 years after we were told the recession was over, just like we're being told unemployment is only 5.1%, only 21% of small businesses in the United States say they've recovered. It's about 1 in 5. The others are still in trouble. Now, there's a story coming out of Zero Hedge. As you know, there's been all of these trial balloons in the corporate media about the advantages of the cashless society. You don't want to carry those paper notes and coins around in your pocket. They weigh you down. They carry germs, which is nonsense. Germs couldn't live on the money I make. And, of course, the reason for a cashless society has nothing to do with your convenience but that of the bankers. They want all of the wealth in their computers. They don't want you to have any in your pocket. And even more importantly, if there's a cashless society, you can't withdraw your money from the bank. There can't be a run on the bank. All you can do is tell your bank to send your money someplace else. So now there's a suggestion, because opposition to a ban on cash was loud. I mean, let's be realistic. They're not going to ban cash. What would the politicians stick into the G-strings of the strippers? But now there's a new idea being floated on how there's going to be a tax on physical cash. That, yes, you can have cash if you want, but they're going to tax you if you have your money in your own pocket to stimulate the economy by encouraging you to put your money back in the bank or to spend it. It's ridiculous. The article also points out the fact that the Fed claimed it was going to raise rates when unemployment fell to 6.5%. We were told that happened last April, and they still haven't raised the rates. Partly because the Federal Reserve understands that 5.1% figure we're being told is totally bogus. And they understand the instant they raise the rates, Wall Street will collapse. Because it's that virtually free money pouring out of the Federal Reserve all over Wall Street that's keeping the stock market looking like it's a functioning economy. And it isn't. Okay, now has come the time to talk about Hillary Clinton's email scandal. And it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. According to Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton, which has succeeded in prying loose a lot of these emails through Freedom of Information Act requests, it turns out there are gaps in the emails that were turned over, totaling 5 months, including one single gap as long as a month, in which we are supposed to believe that there wasn't anything happening at the State Department. I'm sure Hillary's out there saying, I was on vacation. I was having my hair done. I was goofing off. Really, I didn't do anything that entire month. I just sat there smiling at people. And the State Department has confirmed there are gaps in the Clinton email record. The emails she sent to the State Department have large gaps in the timeline. This could open Hillary up to a perjury charge. Shades of Richard Nixon's missing 18 minutes, huh? It's not the crime that does you, it's the cover-up, and that's the perception. Now, it gets even more interesting than that, because apparently it's now come out that the classified emails that Hillary Clinton had on her server were sent to some of her staffers and associates through outside email accounts like Gmail, which means those classified emails are sitting somewhere on Google's servers. Now, Hillary is still trying to maintain that the information was not classified when it was sent to her. And senior intelligence officials are saying that's nonsense. Much of what Hillary had was classified on creation. And they're saying that if somebody working for Hillary stripped off the markings indicating classification, that in and of itself is a felony. To remove the markings saying this communication is classified, top secret, no foreign, keyhole, whatever the various designations are. Removing those marks is a felony in and of itself. Another article coming on out from Investment Watch blog, further confirmation that donors to the Clinton Foundation got weapons deals. This was the essence of Larry Klayman's RICO lawsuit against the Clinton Foundation, which was tossed out of court by a Clinton-appointed judge who refused to recuse himself despite the very obvious conflict of interest. And I hope Larry's going to refile. Now, Hillary's support has fallen by 21 points since July. Trump continues to gain. So does Bernie Sanders. They're not calling him a fringe candidate any longer. He is now leading Hillary in Iowa and New Hampshire. That is significant. That's according to polls taken just yesterday. Apparently the Morning Joe panel was astounded. You know, how can Sanders be outdoing Our Lady of Hillary? Now, even more interesting and indicative is Hillary's success with women. And we're going to talk about that when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Hillary's campaign has operated on the assumption, and we know what assume means, that women are going to vote for Hillary just because she's a woman. And that has been an article of faith among the Hillary campaign staff all along. Last week they had a bit of an embarrassment because Hillary set up this women-only campaign event in Columbus, Ohio, and almost nobody showed up. So now there's an article over in the Daily Beast, why are women ditching Hillary? And they're focusing primarily on the Democratic women, which the conventional wisdom, yes, the Democratic women are going to vote for Hillary because she's a woman. And Hillary's been pushing this. When she was on the Ellen DeGeneres show Thursday, you know, Hillary said, one of my merits is I'm a woman. And, of course, Ellen DeGeneres came back that they're only making a fuss about the email scandal because Hillary's a woman. If it had been a man, they wouldn't have done a thing about it. Forgetting how they ousted Richard Nixon over his tape recordings. But the reality is that more and more women, including feminists, are turning away from Hillary. First of all, because of the perception she's untrustworthy. Her long track record of going on just vicious attacks against the victims of her husband's sexual predations. No sympathy at all for the women. Just destroy them, smear them, malign them in the media, ruin their reputation. Doesn't sound like somebody who is very supportive of the women's point of view in sexual harassment cases. And a lot of women, I think, are looking at Hillary and they're not identifying with her. When a political candidate is out there trying to build support, they try and put out the impression that they are just like you. That you could all hang out together and be buds and be friends. And Hillary's almost gone out of the way to destroy that. Talking about the economy and poverty, then going off shopping at Bergdorf Goodman. $600 haircuts. And a lot of women look at Hillary and they don't identify with her. Now, we're getting word that there may be a change of leadership within the Democratic National Committee itself. There is a growing resentment against the current chairperson, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And a lot of it has to do with this idea of declaring there will be no more debates than those already scheduled. And any candidates who engage in debates not sanctioned by Debbie Wasserman Schultz will be penalized, will be punished. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is very much on board Hillary's campaign. She's trying to shape the Democratic National Committee to support Hillary's candidacy, not let any of the other Democratic candidates get near her, including Bernie Sanders and potentially Joe Biden. He's still making noises about stepping in. And so now there's a big growing movement within the DNC to get rid of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Now, the Obama administration is attempting to suppress accounts of CIA torture, one of the blackest black marks against the American character, well, certainly in my lifetime. And they're talking about the first-person account by a detainee in Guantanamo, Abu Zubaydah, how he was tortured in a CIA prison. Now, he's got lawyers that are basically trying to get him released. He's been held in Guantanamo since 2002 for the past 9 years. And every document created by his legal team is immediately declared classified. Now, some that has come out is that this guy was waterboarded 83 times in 1 month, between 2 and 3 times a day. And he lost an eye under torture. And I mention this because it confirms something we've been saying all along. Far worse things than waterboarding have been done to these people by the government of the United States of America. And that's why even though the military kangaroo court hearing these terrorism cases has declared at least 1/3 of the people being held at Guantanamo innocent of any wrongdoing and recommended their release, the White House still will not release them. Because when the world sees the scars of what was done to these people, it's going to be a major problem. This guy lost an eye. And the government doesn't have a reason for continuing to hold him. That's what the legal actions are all about. Now, down in Dallas, there's a law firm representing a high-profile State Department whistleblower. And over this last weekend, the building was broken into, and the thieves stole 3 computers and files from the file cabinets. Nothing else was taken. There were silver coins, silver bars, video equipment, other valuables were not touched. Gee, I wonder if this break-in has anything to do with the whistleblower case. Shades of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office. We're into Nixon territory here with all this stuff. Now, here's a very bizarre story. University of California may give students the right to not be offended. The University of California may explicitly recognize a right for students to not be offended. Board of Regents is going to look at this next week. What a far cry from the University of California in the 1960s when students unconcerned with offending anybody helped bring about the end of the war in Vietnam. What happens when the Christian students get offended by the teaching of evolution? What happens when the physically challenged are offended by the athletic program? What happens when the foreign students are offended by the use of English on the campus? What happens when the feminists are offended by any class with male students? He who dares not offend cannot be honest. Thomas Paine. The curse of our society is we have way too many people whose only sense of self-value is that they can find something to be offended by. But there is and never has been any guarantee that you will not be offended. And in a society that values free speech, one must accept things that one finds offensive as the price one pays to say things others may find offensive. So what's going on here? Well, it turns out that the UC Regents have been lobbied by Jewish organizations to adopt a new definition of anti-Semitism, which includes criticism of the government of Israel and its actions. So that's what this is all about. Censoring speech critical of Israel by saying, oh, I'm a Jewish student, I'm offended by the fact that you think Netanyahu was wrong to bomb Gaza. That's what it's all about. Getting past that First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Because Israel hates that. Israel hates freedom of speech and expression. They've actually formed an organization to destroy the career of anybody critical of Israel. I'm hearing that they're out there, they're after Jeff Rentz now, trying to scare his advertisers away. Does that sound like democracy in action? Or does it sound like brown shirt behavior? Anyway. Now, as you know, out in California, they're having some major wildfire problems. They had to evacuate a small town, burned to the ground. Everyone's pointing fingers. Oh, it's the drought. It's human-caused global warming. And certainly there's a drought in California, which has been caused primarily by the contamination of 2 large aquifers with fracking chemicals, and the remaining aquifers being pumped dry by companies like Nestle to sell back to the people of California for $2 for a little tiny plastic bottle. There's no water left over for agriculture or firefighting. The other problem is that as we've slipped into this wartime economy, there's no money to manage the overburden, to make sure the fire roads are plowed open, make sure the fire breaks are still clear. So it's a combination of these that has basically turned California into a tinderbox. All right, we got to take a break for our top of the hour news segment. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these words from our sponsors and the latest headline news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. So let's talk about human-caused global warming, and they're getting desperate. They know we're heading into another horrendous winter, and they're out there trying to scream, if we don't act now, we'll be doomed in just 5 years. And, of course, they've been saving that for going on 30 years now. And I think possibly the absolute most pathetic, desperate attempt to revive the global warming hoax is this article that was in no less than the New York Times. It was an op-ed. And it says, it's titled The Next Genocide. And it starts out with this wag the Holocaust story of how cruel it was when people were being destroyed by the Nazis, blah, 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 blah. And then it warps it on over to the threat to humankind from human-caused global warming, and how anybody who refuses to pay carbon taxes, buy and sell carbon credits, and allow a global environmental authority to decide how to live, well, they're just no better than the Nazis were. Using one gigantic hoax to try and prop up another gigantic hoax. And the carbon Nazis are starting to acknowledge the fact that the indications are we're heading into another harsh winter. And apparently Britain's top climate and weather body, the Met Office, said that, yeah, it's been cool. There was a pause in global warming, but trust us, it's really going to explode into a flaming inferno in 2016. Now, remember back in 2009, the British Met Office predicted a snow-free winter for Britain, and Britain got hit with one of the hardest white winters in history. In fact, it was almost eerie. Satellite images looking down on Great Britain, it was all white. It almost looked like a map of white land over dark ocean. But they're still out there trying to sell this nonsense. Partly they want your money. Partly they don't want to admit that they were wrong. A lot of academic institutions and government agencies, and certainly a lot of corporate media, bet their reputations on human-caused global warming. And now they're trying to figure out a way they can get out of it and not look like fools at best, complicit liars at worst. Now, there's an interesting little story that came out of the Watchers, and it's a little scientific article about how scientists have confirmed that the axial seamount did have an eruption in April of this year. And they've got little sonar maps showing the extent of the lava field. And it's all very interesting. But it is a reminder. There are, in fact, active volcanoes on the ocean floor. There's a whole bunch of them underneath where the El Nino current emerges. Nobody knows where all of them are. And as this article shows, they're not even really sure when they're erupting. Now, none of the Carbonazzi's computer models about global warming factor in seafloor geothermal events. The models that are supposed to predict when El Nino happens cannot possibly work. Because if, in fact, El Nino is a plume of warm water from an undersea ocean eruption, you can't predict that. You can't predict when a volcano is going to erupt, even here on planet Earth where you can see it. But they're still out there pushing all of this nonsense. And it's all driven by politics. It's all driven by money. It's all driven by funding, the golden rule of science. Whoever's got the gold, they decide the science. Scientists love to be able to come out and say, I've discovered this and it's the end of the world, because then the media shows up and interviews them and they get more and more funding to do what they're doing. And human-caused global warming has been the golden ticket since the 1990s. If you'll stand up and say, oh, yes, I can prove that humans are destroying the planet, you'll get all kinds of media attention, all kinds of funding, because the ruling elites use scientists today the same way they used to use the clergy during the Middle Ages. You know, I want you to do this, and this guy in the priestly robe says, God agrees. Well, people don't really listen that much to the guys in the priestly robes anymore, especially after all the child molestation scandals, so they switch to the scientists. I have a guy in a white lab coat who says you should do what I tell you. And that's starting to fade as well. All right, we're going to start grabbing some phone calls here. Glenn in Pennsylvania, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'm offended, Mike.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm offended at your offense. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, funny you should say that, because the reason I called was to mention, and you probably remember this, that decades ago, back from the dawn of time, Burt Breathitt in a Bloom County comic strip did a cartoon about this very thing called offense sensitivity.
Yes, I remember that. I loved Bloom County.
Yeah, it was so prescient. I mean, you know, there might have been a little bit of that stuff back then, you know, but I mean, the whole thing goes, you know, this comic offends my offensiveness, and, you know, life is offensive, and it ends up as just saying offense sensitivity. And it's like, how many decades ahead of the curve was he on that one?
Well, he was, and also his follow-on strip, Outland, was just amazing, and I'm rather sorry that it was discontinued, but he gored a few too many oxes.
Well, I remember when I thought it was a good decision on his part, because we saw what happened when Trudeau tried to drag Doonesbury out too long and morph the characters too much. Burt Breathitt said that he wanted to, he wanted to stop it before it soured, before it started to go downhill.
I can understand that. On the other hand, I think Trudeau could have done more with his characters. It's just he had bumped up against some lines which he could not cross without newspapers starting to cancel his cartoon. And he was very controversial. There were a couple of times where his comic strip was banned from the comics section only to turn up in the editorial page. There's so many great lines in both those comic strips, the Chinese father saying, eat your pickled duck's web with her children starving in West Virginia. Yeah. That was a lot of good stuff there. Anyway, anything else, Glenn?
No, that's it for now.
All right, well, then I'm going to switch over to Bill in Texas. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Bill in Texas. Okay, I'm going to put Bill back on hold, and we're going to switch over to Lenny in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
I'm doing fine.
Hey, listen, I hope I'm not beating a dead horse here, but did anyone call to speak about the Poroshenko talking about the oligarchs ruining the Ukraine?
Yeah. And he's an oligarch himself, of course.
Yeah, but you know what he's doing, right? He's doing like any mafia boss would do. Now that he has the power, he wants to get rid of all of his competition.
Yeah, that's a very good analysis.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Now that he has the power of what he's considered the backing of the Western elite mafia, now he wants to use the military and get rid of all of his competition.
Well, he's also playing populism there because he knows the people of Ukraine don't like oligarchs either, and Poroshenko is struggling to keep his job. And so I think a big part of his speech was really trying to go out to the masses and say, see, I'm really doing some good. I'm going to get the oligarchs out of power. Whether he really does or not, of course, remains to be seen.
Well, then he would have to get himself out of power then, wouldn't he?
Well, obviously, he's not going to take himself out of power, and he's struggling to stay in there, but it looks like Saakashvili is being groomed to be his replacement. Lenny, thank you very much. I got to let you go. We're going to take a break for commercials, and hopefully Bill in Texas will be on the line when we get back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And I want to mention one more time before the end of the program, I am going to be the guest on Coast to Coast Radio tonight from 10 p.m. to midnight Pacific time. And please tune in. Please tell your social media to tune in. And we're going to have a real good time over there because we had fun the last time I did Coast to Coast as well. All right, let's go on back here and see if Bill in Texas ever got back to the phone. Bill, are you there?
Hello.
Bill, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
Well, my name is Daryl, but that's close enough.
Oh, Daryl, okay. I got to flog that hamster in the control room because he's hitting the wrong keys on that keyboard.
I listen to your show a lot. You are amazing. But I did want to tell this story because it's just eating at me all day long. One of my employees got pulled over this morning. Unfortunately, he missed a day's work. Not for any kind of speed violation or any kind of traffic. They noticed him, recognized him, pulled him over, took all the money he had on him, said that he owed the city some money, so then they released him. But unfortunately, it was after everybody left for work, so he got to miss a day's work, plus he got strong-armed by the city police here in Princeton, Texas.
Boy, the police are the new highwaymen, aren't they?
Yeah, they're just becoming the strong arm, just like the mafia.
They're pillaging the population. Whether this guy really owed the money or not, I mean, we've seen the civil forfeiture thing just go completely out of control, where the police are pillaging the wealth of the American people, and that's not democracy. It's not a republic. It's absolute fascist fiscal tyranny.
Well, he's worked with me for years. There's been no papers served. They just pulled him over and announced to him he owes the city $3,000 for some trash that wasn't cleaned up in his grandmother's yard.
Oh, come on. That is just absurd. That is just absurd.
This is a fact. The whole family has been charged with the crime of not cleaning up the yard. And they're all being charged thousands and thousands of dollars. And they're just going to take it the hard way. They're going to pull them over and not arrest them. They just take the money they got on them and tell them have a nice day.
Now this yard where all the trash is, I mean, that's private property, right?
Yeah, and it's an old farm. It's been there for a long time. The city's moved in around them. In fact, they've actually run watershed off onto them, and the people live there. You know, they can't afford to fight the city, and basically the city's trying to strong-arm them off the property. Yeah,
that's what it sounds like to me. This farm, we don't need a farm. It's not Monsanto. It's not GMO. We need to develop a new shopping center on that property. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. We saw a lot of that out in Nevada. The Air Force is ostensibly taking some more ranch land south of Area 51, ostensibly because of secret research being done there. But we know that every time the land gets grabbed, 6 months, a year down the road, looks like we didn't need it after all, we're going to sell it to these developers. That's what they were trying to do with the Bundy Ranch. The Bundys were the lone holdout. The developers had bought the land all around the Bundy Ranch to build a whole new shopping center, interchange situation. The Bundys wouldn't sell. That's why they're trying to force them off.
Well, I just know I go to my city council meetings as one necessary. And unfortunately, I'm not in that city that he lives in. But it seems to me like the city council has decided it's okay to use the police to strong arm and basically rob people. Basically rob them at gunpoint.
I mean, did they have a warrant or a bill or a piece of paper? They just grabbed the money out of the guy's pocket.
Just grabbed the money out of his pocket and said, "Is this all you got?" And they said, "This is how much you owe now," and let him go.
Oh, that is just... And then the cops are wondering why the American people are not very fond of them anymore.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I mean, this thing has been eating at me all day long.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. What a shock, you know.
Yeah, I just hope it doesn't become policy everywhere.
I'm sure it will. As the U.S. struggles to stay ahead of the impossible-to-pay debt, as they sink deeper into the wartime economy, yeah, they're going to be grabbing money from everybody under any pretext. I am fully expecting at some point there's going to be a ban on private ownership of gold coins and gold bars, again, maybe even silver, because we have to give it to the poor, struggling banks to keep them going. And, I mean, the last official act of any government is to loot the people. And that's exactly what's going on right now.
Well, if they don't consider this criminal, then I don't know what crime is, because that's just what they were arresting the mafia for back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I agree. It is a crime. To me, it looks like a crime, and I'm sure public perception is going to agree. Anyway, listen, Bill, I wish your employee good luck in dealing with this mess. But, yeah, it's flimsy pretext, and you owe us money, and we're going to come grab the money. That is a trend growing all across the United States right now.
All right, well, thanks again, and keep up the good work.
I will do so as long as I can. Thank you for the phone call. Now, we're getting an interesting story that is coming in from SOTT.net. Surprise announcement by the government of Germany. They're moving away from the U.S. anti-Putin alliance, and they are now saying they're going to join forces with Russia in the coalition to defeat ISIS. Putin has played this brilliantly. The U.S. created this ISIS-Al-Qaeda crisis in Syria in order to justify attacks on Syria. And everybody knows it was a dodge. But Putin is saying, we're going to go into Syria and help you deal with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And we call for a global coalition against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, knowing that they're U.S. proxies, and now Germany is signing on. Apparently so is France. And I'm sure over at the White House they're screaming, you can't do that! Now, you remember Charlie Hebdo? Famous for these highly offensive cartoons they did of Muslims and Christians and the Pope, and we all felt sorry for them when there was an attack on their offices. They just came out with a new cartoon on their current issue, and it's a drawing of the drowned Syrian toddler, and it's captioned, "Proof that Europe is Christian, Christians walk on water, Muslim kids drown." And any sympathy that anybody may have had for Charlie Hebdo, and I didn't because it felt like a false flag setup to me. I mean, that is just way, way over the top. But that's what they've been doing all along. Some of the cartoons about Christians and the popes and the rest of it. The only religion they don't seem to really go after, of course, is Judaism. Little absence in their spectrum of what they call satire. That's not satire. This is just bad taste. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with more news after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're getting some new news stories coming in. Over in Great Britain, they're still going whack over the fact that Jeremy Corbyn pulled off this upset victory by the widest public mandate in British history. And they're still on the attack. The UK Telegraph described the new shadow chancellor as a nut job and then was immediately forced to retract it. Now, apparently, Corbyn has appointed John McDonnell to his cabinet, And McDonnell is an outspoken opponent to the independence of the central banks. And the Telegraph basically said this is cloud cuckoo land economics, the idea of the government in charge of the public currency, the idea of a public currency as a public utility. How wacko crazy can they get? The central bankers are in a panic. And I hope Corbyn is wearing his Kevlar undies, because world leaders who defy the central banks, they get shot at a lot. If you have not read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, you might want to take a look. The central bankers have enslaved the planet. They're not going to give up that wealth and power without a bloody fight. Now, over in the areas where these refugees are streaming into Europe, a Sky News reporter, Jonathan Samuels, found a handbook that the refugees are being given before they leave for Europe. It's called The Rough Guide, and it's distributed by the Open Society Group, which is funded by George Soros. This is a handbook of maps, tips, phone numbers of organizations, government welfare agencies to call once they arrive in Europe. And the organization's website says, "We welcome all travelers on their difficult trip and wish you all a good journey because freedom of movement is everybody's right." And the Soros Group has been preaching for 2 decades now. The people of the third world are entitled to the wealth of the first world because it was stolen from them. Do you remember the movie The Dark Knight Rises? The bad guy, Bane? The Soros Group is sounding just like him. And it underscores the very real possibility that this whole refugee crisis is being fanned up and exploited as part of the plan to dissolve a sense of national cultural identity for the entire world, except of course for Israel, to reduce us to a formless, blended population of humanity that'll be more agreeable to the imposition of a single global government and a single global central bank. Now, over the last couple of months, we've been talking about these horrible accidents where U.S. government labs were sending live strains of anthrax to laboratories in various states, and eventually came out all 50 states had received this live weaponized anthrax spores, rather than the deactivated ones that were supposed to be used for developing testing kits or vaccines or whatever. Now, USA Today is reporting that the problem extended beyond anthrax to include other deadly viruses, the plague bacteria, basically everything the U.S. has been weaponizing as a biological weapon has been mislabeled, improperly stored, and shipped to places that really shouldn't have it. Some of this stuff is biosafety level 4. And it's going to academic institutions and laboratories that aren't equipped to deal with that. Apparently, the anthrax has been mishandled for going on 10 years. Nobody knows where any of this stuff is now. Now, out in California, Monsanto has suffered a major setback. The state of California has now listed glyphosate, the main ingredient of the Roundup weed killer, as known to cause cancer. And I'm sure Monsanto's already out there with their checkbook screaming, no, you got to pull it off and say, maybe cause cancer. It'll just water it down, because Monsanto loves to buy the truth. Remember when Prop 37 was out there for GMO labeling, and Monsanto was out there with their checkbook, buying anybody who would support the ban on GMO label or oppose the requirement for GMO labeling? They went to every media outlet in California and said, if you do not come out against GMO labeling, we will take our advertising elsewhere. And so now California, the state government, has acknowledged what has been reported scientifically. Glyphosate causes cancer. And Monsanto apparently doesn't care if you get cancer from their products as long as they get your money. And that is what has gone wrong with the American culture. This need to get stacks of ink and paper to service one's debt or to lift the CEOs up to palatial living standards has overridden all other considerations. It's destroyed what was best in the American character. Now, I don't have a problem with people who want to be rich. I'd like to be rich myself. There are just certain things I won't do to get there. But for society to function, there has to be a balance. Yes, we want to make money, but we should also want to make safe, effective, durable, good products that we can take pride in. We want to have pride of craftsmanship, of being the best at what we do. We want to put out products that don't hurt people. That's all gone away. Right now, we ought to rename our nation to the United States of AFAB. Anything for a buck. That's the way they're acting. Now, a food activist organization has filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Agriculture alleging violations of the Freedom of Information Act following multiple requests to get documentation on the known harmful effects of genetically modified organisms. And apparently an agency of the USDA, APHIS, has failed to provide responses to 29 separate Freedom of Information Act requests and appeals. They're simply ignoring it. No, you can't have it. And there are no grounds to refuse that information. It doesn't violate anybody's privacy. It certainly doesn't affect national security. And I hope the lawsuit moves forward, but in this day and age, the entire system is corrupt. And anything that is extracting wealth from the people is considered good, and anything that gets in the way of that is considered bad. Now, when we come back from this coming commercial break, I have been commenting for a long time on the link between antidepressants and extreme acts of violence. And last week I started posing the question, maybe there are other changes in our behavior caused by these medications that which, because they're not newsworthy, nobody's really tracking. And I documented how the rise in domestic violence per capita incidence in the U.S. tracks exactly with the growing use of these medications. And now apparently there's been another study that shows, yeah, there are all different kinds of violence that track with the increase in antidepressant prescriptions. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here, and we're looking at this story that came in out of RINF.com. As you know, the European Union nations, and actually a few others, have been trying to get back their gold bullion that is being stored for them in the New York Federal Reserve, following the big stink with Germany. And the New York Fed is obligated to try and make good on all of that. And as a result, we're getting a report that the New York Federal Reserve has the lowest level of gold reserves in decades. There's a run going on gold. Apparently, a bank under investigation in Russia turned out to have gold-plated metal in its vault, supposedly as part of its cash reserves. So they're in big trouble. Everybody's faking this stuff. Down in Mexico, I just got an email from Puerto Vallarta. Banco Azteca has suspended all silver sales. It's getting serious out there. Now, getting on back to the science and medical news. Apparently, 23 seniors have died after receiving the flu shot sold by the pharmacies. This is Stage2Omega.com reporting on this. And what's really interesting is they're talking about the package inserts for the flu vaccine carry a warning. This stuff can kill you. But they're marketed as over-the-counter medications, no prescription needed. Come on in. You know, you get a discount on the rest of your shopping if you get the flu shot today. And the reason they can do that is because if you're injured or die from a vaccine, you and your family cannot sue the manufacturer of the vaccine. This was a law enacted by Congress as part of the Homeland Security Act and upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2011. And as the baby boomers become senior citizens, they're seen as a lucrative market. It's not about health. It's all about making money. They're old anyway. Who cares if they died? As long as we got their money. Making huge amounts of money. And apparently it works because vaccine billionaire Cyrus Poonawalla just bought a former Maharaja's mansion in Mumbai from the U.S. government for $113 million. This 50,000 square foot seaside mansion was the U.S. consulate from 1957, then renamed Lincoln House. And it was put on the market 4 years ago when the consulate was relocated to a purpose-built facility. A lot of money in those needle jabs. That's what it's really all about. Now, there's been a new Ebola death in Sierra Leone, and so once again they're having to back off, saying that, yeah, we got this back under control. They keep popping up over there. Now, here's an interesting little story. As you're probably aware, I'm dealing with a summer cold. I was not doing very well on Friday, doing a lot better today, because over the weekend I've been dosing myself with my homemade Nano Silver. And you can find the instructions on my website on how to do that stuff. Or you can go down to the local health food store and you can buy it there. Interestingly enough, NASA has just approved the use of Nano Silver, colloidal silver, as an antibiotic in space. And their reasoning is the FDA has no jurisdiction in Earth orbit. And this all came about because the International Space Station has two separate life support systems. One for the United States and one for the Russians. The Russians have been using Nano Silver to purify their water supply, but their water system has to be isolated from the U.S. system, which uses iodine. And NASA finally said, look, let's just merge the two water systems and dump the iodine, and we're going to go along with the Russian suggestion of antibacterial silver, and the FDA can't say anything about it because their jurisdiction does not extend into space. So one more positive mention for Nano Silver as an antibacterial antiviral. Now, apparently, down in North Carolina, there is a growing scandal. Scientists at the North Carolina State University in the U.S. have studied the level of contamination of fresh water and found chemicals that may change human sex, leading to hermaphroditism. And they're talking about xenoestrogens that they're finding in the fish population, which is causing distortions among them. And they're saying, essentially, there's nothing to keep it from doing the same thing in humans. And this is pollution. It's ubiquitous in the environment. Pesticides, plastics. We're not being careful with this stuff. We're all supposed to be worried about our plastic bags and human-caused global warming, and there are far more dangerous threats to our health and safety, such as these very exotic chemicals, which cannot be cleaned out of the water by the present water reclamation systems. Fukushima, the recent storm over there, just drove huge amounts of highly radioactive water into the Pacific. No, don't worry about all that stuff. Little radiation's good for you. You need to be worried about human-caused global warming and pay your carbon taxes. Now, as you heard on the news break, we had the Miss America pageant over the weekend. I didn't even know they still had those things. And Miss Georgia won, I guess. Apparently, Miss Colorado created quite a stir by saying that Ellen DeGeneres should be on the $10 bill. And I'm sure it's only a coincidence that marijuana is now legal in Colorado. But let's face it, beauty pageants are not there to impress us with the intellectual capacity of these young ladies. And I think beauty pageants send a very wrong message. You know, that women should just want to be whatever arbitrary definition of beautiful happens to be in vogue. And I think it's nonsense. You're all beautiful the way the universe made you. Anybody telling you you're not is out there trying to sell you some kind of a product, and that's what Miss America is all about. It's the premier thing of convincing women that they're not what they should be, but they can be if they will buy this hair color, this spray, this cream, this powder, whatever. And yeah, it's not known for intellectual brilliance. Little bit of a stink coming out of the website for the Washington Post. They now have code that will block your browser from seeing the Washington Post if you have any ad blocker applications, extensions, or plugins. If the Washington Post website detects that you are blocking pop-up ads, they will present an overlay saying you can't read our website while you're blocking the ads. This is going to backfire on them because the Washington Post website isn't really worth all that much to read anyway. It's just more government lies. And you annoy the readers, they're going to go someplace else, like WhatReallyHappened.com. Let's see. We already talked about the lowest gold reserves in decades remain. All right. That's the talking points for today here. Final reminder, I will be the guest on Coast to Coast tonight. I just got another confirmation from them. 10 p.m. to midnight tonight, we're going to be talking about the refugee crisis. We're going to be talking about the email scandal. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things. It'll be 2 hours of wonderful things, I hope. Please tune in. Please get on your social media, your email. Tell everybody else to tune on in. If their audience number surges while I'm on there, they might actually ask me back for a third time, which would be a lot of fun. And finally, getting back to more serious situations right now, I am getting a strong sense of panic from multiple entrenched political interests, whether it's the British Tories and the old Labour who are in a panic over Jeremy Corbyn, America's politicians who are in a panic over Donald Trump, the Democrats in a panic over Hillary's plunging poll numbers, and unfortunately we're seeing a lot of desperate people out there. And desperate people will often take desperate chances, even when there's little hope for success. And so I think we just really need to keep our eyes open and continue to be very critical and analytical about anything that we are being told by anybody in the media, anybody in the government, and by the way, that includes me. Because I can and do make mistakes occasionally, and I do have a lot of people trying to send me nonsense stuff. You need to learn how to be your own best analyst and figure out what's going on. A skeptical people is a free people. And there's the music, and it's time for me to get on out and do Jim Goddard's show in Vancouver, and then again, I'll be on Coast to Coast tonight from 10 p.m. to midnight Pacific time. So, until tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Share what you know with everybody you know, and again, thanks to everybody calling their local talk radio stations. We're starting to pick up more on-air affiliates. Have a good night. Aloha, America.